Hello, everybody. As you get let in from the waiting room, it's so good to see you all, especially some familiar faces. We will wait to get the go-ahead from Ashley, just making sure that everyone from the now waiting room has been admitted. Then we're going to go ahead and get started.
Everyone has been let into the waiting room, or let in from the waiting room.
Great. Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you guys once again for being here today. Welcome to the Renton Chamber of Commerce Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Conversation Series. My name is Sean Greenlee, board member and DEI liaison for the Chamber. I'm here in collaboration with your Chamber CEO, Diane Dobson, and we're also co-sponsoring this with the Kent Chamber of Commerce CEO, Zenovia Harris. I want to thank the City of Renton, again, as always, Preeti Shadar and Benita Horn for their partnership and ongoing support of this program. I also want to acknowledge Rock Project Management, Renton Technical College, and Dr. Linda Smith for their continuous engagement and support. As we try to emphasize, goal to help support our member organizations and community as we navigate through this journey while learning ourselves. We seek to provide additional resources and community collaboration and shared mentorship as we look to tackle these complex issues. We all know that we must work together and leverage each other's knowledge while acknowledging that many of us are operating under resource constraints. Creating an inclusive environment and improved employee and community engagement is critical to success in both the workplace and for improved business. Leading today's forum will once again be Benita Horn, Inclusion Equity Consultant for the City of Renton. The focus of her consulting practice is organizational development through a social justice lens. Most of her clients are government entities and nonprofit organizations. Co-facilitating will be Zenovia Harris. Zenovia is the CEO of the Kent Chamber of Commerce and also a diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging consultant. In this session, we will explore the impact of prejudgment and bias, specifically as it relates to implicit bias and the underlying realities and the impact of that. We will hear from Benita and Zenovia and have the opportunity to discuss thoughts and reflections. We want to encourage this session to be an open forum where you, the community, ask questions and share insights. Conversations in the breakout rooms will not be recorded, so we encourage this to be a brave space for dialogue and reflection. We'll also be monitoring the chat box throughout the workshop. Please, as always, be respectful of others. Benita, with that, I pass it over to you.
Thank you. So Ashley, if you want to pull up our PowerPoint that Zenovia and I'll be using. We're really excited to bring you this workshop tonight, kind of beginning to scratch the surface on implicit bias. Some of you may have heard that term, and it comes up again and again in conversation. So if we go to the next slide, we're two things that we're going to be focusing on in our time together this evening. First of all, just to understand what implicit bias is and its impact on decisions and on customer service. And then to explore strategies to reduce implicit bias and reduce inequitable outcomes in our decisions and in our interactions. We have a question, Ashley, if we could put the PowerPoint on your share screen. So I'll leave that technology up to you. We see it in your thumbnail and it might be a little small for folks. Or Ashley, do you want me to pull it up on my screen? Okay, there we go. The only downside of that is that we can't see everybody. Okay, this is right where we are. So those of you who've been with us consistently know that one of the sessions that we focused on was courageous conversations. And there were 4 frames for that. And if we look at the next slide, we're just going to encourage that we continue to use those frames in our interactions with each other. First of all, that we stay engaged, both in our heart and mind level. As we talk about these issues, today it's about implicit bias, that we expect and accept non-closure. We're not going to get everything we need. We're not going to change the world. We're not going to reach closure in our learning, but it really is a way of continuing our journey. As we share in the large group and in the breakout groups, that we speak our truth, which really means being honest about our thoughts and feelings and opinions, at the same time understanding and recognizing the impact that they might have on others. And so it's that balance that we make, that we try to speak our truth and at the same time without doing harm to others. And experience discomfort. We live in a country that is in a state of racial strife every single day. And so even talking about these issues can create discomfort. And so we just want to encourage every one of us to open up, to think about what we're thinking about, to examine our own core beliefs, values, perceptions, and behaviors. And that's part of the journey this evening. I'm going to start, if we look at the next slide, with a quote from an author, Howard Ross. He is well known as an author. He's written a book, Understanding and Navigating Implicit Bias in Everyday Life. And when in one of his presentations, he made this statement. He said, ultimately, we believe that our decisions are consistent with our conscious beliefs, when in fact, our unconscious is running the show. And so I don't know how his quote strikes you, but I want you to think about that throughout our conversation about implicit bias. And because it took me some time to digest and think about that statement myself. So I would just invite you to join me in that examination. So in starting to talk about implicit bias, it's important to first start with, brain research. We look at the next slide, understanding a little bit about how our brain works. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Lucy, but it kind of was a takeoff on the theme that I'm going to be talking about. But research has shown that only about 2% of emotional cognition, in other words, what's in the conscious part of our brain, only 2% is available to us consciously. And so almost everything in our brain is playing out unconsciously. Racial bias, other biases tend to reside in the unconscious network. And we unconsciously have tapes playing in the background with these biases, even when we aren't discussing it or speaking it. It's kind of like the ever ready bunny, never stops running. So it's important to understand that if we think about bias, the bias really is nothing more than the evaluation of one group and its members relative to another group and their members. And we all carry bias. We can't help it. It's part of a human condition. We're all biased for some things and biased against other things, biased in favor of some people and biased in opposition to other people. And so there's no problem with that. We all have that. I have a good friend who says the only people without bias are buried 6 feet under, which is a pretty dramatic way to say it. But it's only when we act on our biases, not that we have them, but when we act on them, that it can be discriminatory and can create negative outcomes for particular individuals or groups. And so that's why it's important that we talk about this subject. If we look at the next slide, there's actually 2 kinds of bias. There's one form that's called explicit bias, These are the biases that, as my kids would say, we know up close and personal, because these are the biases that sit in that 2% of our brain that we have access to consciously. We can express these biases directly. We're aware that we have them because it operates in the conscious part of our brain. And an example, I could say something like, I like men more than women. I might not be proud of it, but if that is my bias, I can actually even articulate it. Implicit bias, on the other hand, is expressed indirectly. It resides in the 98% of our unconscious brain. We have no access to it, so we're even unaware that we even have bias. It operates completely at the subconscious or unconscious level. So an example, if I have the same bias that I was able to express explicitly, but now it's in an implicit form, when I enter a room, I might sit farther away from a man than from a woman, and I'm not even aware I'm doing it. Somebody might say, Benita, come sit over here. There's an open chair next to Sean. And I'll say, oh no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I already sat down. And and this is not even a conscious decision. So that is the challenge with implicit bias. So it might lead you to the question on the next slide. Well, what if we just suppress our implicit bias? Well, unfortunately, research has shown that if we suppress or deny our biased thoughts, that it can actually increase our prejudices rather than eliminate them. It's almost as though whatever we focus on more becomes bigger. You have a child who walks in the room and they're carrying an antique crystal bowl, and the parent looks up and says, don't drop that bowl. And what's the first thing the child does? Boom. So it's like we focus on it, it becomes more real. The good news is that research has confirmed that if we openly acknowledge and directly challenge our biases, we can make progress. And so that's part of our human dilemma. How can we openly acknowledge and directly challenge that which we do not even know? So that's what I want you to think about as we continue our presentation today. And to start with, I would just like to give you an idea of some of the consequences of implicit bias. How implicit bias can actually take us 180 degrees from our desired goal. And so these are all real world examples. The first one is an example that came up among symphony orchestras. If we look at the next slide, most cities of any size have symphony orchestras. And if you've ever gone to look in the orchestra pit, you will see that most of the musicians are male. As a matter of fact, for years, most symphonies have been trying to hire more female musicians, but with not much success. So a few years ago, several orchestras got together with a consultant and they decided they would try an experiment. This, by the way, was the original blind audition, way before the television show The Voice. And what they did was they arranged that when the musicians came in to audition, the conductors were placed behind a screen so they could hear the music, but they couldn't see the musician. In those orchestras, there was an increase between 25 and 46% of new hires who were female for job openings. Now, if you went back to the conductors and said, are you biased against women? They'd say, no, we've been trying to hire more female musicians for years. But just the fact that they couldn't see, they also tried a second tier of that experiment, where they actually had the musicians take their shoes off before they walked across the stage. And they found that resulted in an additional 10% increase of female musicians. This next example, I really like to include because remember I said implicit biases can be in favor of as well as opposed to. And as it turns out, when it comes to CEOs, we have a strong preference for tall men. The average height of men in the US, it's 5'9". And only 15% of men in the US are 6 foot or taller, 15%. But 58% of CEOs are 6 foot or taller. Only 4% of men in the US are 6'2" or taller, but 30% of CEOs are. That's one of those kind of scratch your head. So evidently, those who make decisions on hiring CEOs have a bias toward height. Let's look at the next example, because this has been repeated again and again across the country. What happens is a company or corporation has a job opening, and the testers submit 2 resumes for that job. The resumes are exactly the same. The only difference on the resume is the name of the applicant. One of the applicants will have a more white sounding name, or what we would call an average US name. The other might have a more ethnic sounding name, like on this slide, a more African American sounding name, Lakeisha Washington. And every single time the Susan Smith, or the quote, white sounding name, received 50% more callbacks for interviews or to continue the employment process. Now, keep in mind, the only difference was the name. Everything else on the resume was identical. Again, if we said to hiring managers, are you biased against Black, Indigenous, and people of color? I'm sure we would get a resounding no. Let's look at the next slide, because this one blows me away. It actually shows that our implicit bias can actually cause us to place ourselves into life-threatening situations. Researchers analyzed 6 decades of death rates from US hurricanes. And what they found was something very interesting. And they excluded Audrey and Katrina because the deaths were so great from those 2 hurricanes. And they found something very interesting, that the average deaths for feminine named hurricanes was 45, whereas the average deaths for masculine named hurricanes was 23. And in 6 different experiments, they interviewed more than 1,000 test subjects to find out, to try to get some rationale behind this. And what they heard from those test subjects was that they were more likely to evacuate from an oncoming storm if it had a male name versus a female name, like Christopher versus Christina, or Victor rather than Victoria. So they found the female names less frightening. So think about that. You live in the Gulf area, somebody says a level 5 hurricane's coming through, and you say, and the name of the hurricane? Christina. Oh, well, we'll just write it out. We've done that before. Oops, no, the name is Christopher. Okay, hit the road, we're evacuating. These are not conscious decisions. Again, implicit bias. So we're going to show you a short video called Addressing Unconscious Bias. Unconscious bias, implicit bias are used interchangeably. And then after the video, you'll have a chance to talk about your reactions. So Ashley, are we ready? I don't think it will play from the slide. You may have to put the address into your browser and bring it up that way. And the web address is, the URL is at the bottom of the slide. Great, thank you.
So, I heard you're about to have your first kid. Congratulations.
Yeah. It's a girl. We're thrilled. I'm a little nervous.
Don't be. You'll do great. Although the timing is a little unfortunate.
How so?
Well, we have a new job opening coming up, and I was thinking about recommending you, but I assume you'll want to switch to part-time as a new father. Okay, let's get started.
Bill, would you mind taking notes on the whiteboard? You have the loveliest handwriting.
Okay.
Good morning. I have a meeting with Erica Martinez.
Oh, hey. Oh, it's great to see you again. I've been meaning to ask you to get in touch with my assistant to reschedule that meeting from last week. Oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. Are you Nadia or Danielle's assistant?
I'm your finance manager.
Okay, folks. Big meeting is coming up tomorrow. How do you want to handle it?
I definitely think Isabel should be a part of it since she did all the analysis.
I think Maria should be there as well. It'll be a great chance for her to see what these kinds of meetings are like.
Makes sense to me. But this is beginning to feel like a big group. Bill, why don't you sit this one out? And that way we'll feel like less of a crowd.
This seems really important. I'd hate to miss out on something that can have a big impact on what we're doing.
Listen, Bill, we're going to need you to be more of a team player if you're going to be successful here.
He did a surprisingly good job on the numbers for the board. It was pretty complicated and math heavy, but he seemed to get it right away.
Well, great. Sounds like some real potential there.
Yeah, but he needs to be more assertive, more forceful. Sometimes he can come off as too soft and nice.
You know, a few others have mentioned something along those lines. I think I'm going to bring it up with him.
I wouldn't do that. He can be a little emotional, and sometimes his feelings get the best of him.
I'll find a way to work it in.
Okay.
Wow. 3 men on one team. This is pretty rare.
Well, we're all just really passionate and excited about the topic.
Really? I just wouldn't have guessed you guys would be interested in working on our new perfume launch.
I thought this would be a great way to get more experience in product marketing.
Yeah, and a huge opportunity to do some really creative work.
Of course. You know, that's great. I'm glad you guys are here. Looking forward to the chit-chat about the football and the sports cars and the planning meetings. Yeah, keep up the good work.
Are you okay? You seem a little stressed lately. Everything okay at home?
Actually, everything's fine. Why do you ask?
Well, it's just you seem a little disheveled lately. Normally you're so well put together and stylish. The stress of the job starting to get to you?
Nope, just trying to stay on top of these presentation deadlines we got coming up.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. That's a lot for you to handle on your own. If you want someone to take some of that workload off of you, Alicia works great under pressure.
Thanks for the offer. I got an email.
Hey, how you doing?
Excited about the party. Just feel bad about being so late, but I got stuck in traffic.
Oh, no worries. These office things, they never really start on time. So who are you here with?
Oh, my wife couldn't make it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed that you were one of the spouses, you know.
No, I work here. My wife doesn't.
Oh, that's nice.
Okay, so Zenovia, you want to take us through the debrief on this?
Yeah, thank you. I always smile at that video. I love that they kind of flipped it on its head, right? So just being a woman in the workplace, I have missed multiple opportunities with the assumption of, oh, your family, can you do this opportunity because you have a child, or can you go away? I actually almost just an opportunity to open up a call center in the industry I was in before in the West Indies, because when they were sitting around at the round table, they're like, she's a single mom. I don't know if she'll be able to stay away that long. And then the fact of the matter is, long story short is I didn't even have children, not let alone be a single mother. And so there was a person in the room who is a sponsor of mine, a girlfriend of mine, that said, I'm not certain. And we were colleagues, I should say girlfriend. We came after that because I thought she really saved me from that opportunity. She said, I'm almost certain that she doesn't. But she has such a great personality. I couldn't imagine that she couldn't get someone to watch her kids, right? And so this is an opportunity for me to go and do something that was kind of big for my career. And so I like this because when you hear it said to a man, it sounds a little different, but it happens every single day with women in the workplace. And so I just like the way they kind of flipped it on its head. And so I just wanted to kind of get your feedback. I don't know if we were going to go into breakout rooms, Miss Benita, or if we were going to do it in the large group room. Yep. So we're going to go into breakout sessions. And you guys can just kind of talk about your reaction to that video, if you've experienced anything like that, and then we'll come back together as a larger group and kind of talk about that. So I think you should see something on your screen that says join, and you'll get sent to your room. we all came back pretty quickly. Miko Lawson, is that you? I can see, I think that's you. Can't be too many Miko L's. And I can't use the chat. If it is you, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you.
You as well. Perfect. Okay, so I think we are back in the group. Miss Benita, did you want to lead a conversation you want folks to go ahead and share out before we start with this activity? You're on mute.
Thank you. I would just be interested in, hearing from one or two people, any thoughts or reactions you had to the video. Anyone want to share what came up for you when you watched it?
And feel free to either come off mute or enter your questions into chat.
I would say that most of that would never happen to a man.
Thank you, Kim. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I'll say that I've been in industry a long time in manufacturing, so it's very male dominated. And, early on in my career, it was still in the 80s when men would get upset and pound on the table and shout in meetings. And so you don't see nearly as much of that anymore. But I have started more recently referring to that as being emotional, because it's not just crying that women do that is being too emotional. It's, yelling in the workplace is inappropriate. And so I've started calling that what it is, to put some perspective on the fact that anybody can be emotional, and just because it's anger doesn't make it appropriate.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like how do we have like a dual system, depending on gender expression and identity. And if this person says it, we call it one thing. And if this person says it, we call it another. Good point. Thank you. So Zenovia, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I know that Miss Benita just did a great job of explaining to us about unconscious bias or implicit bias. But this is a little activity that I kind of put together so that we can exercise that muscle. And so, in my former life, I was a teacher, so I will ask that, and I'm a Gen Xer, so I really like feedback. And so I would really like for you to use the chat during this activity. And essentially, it's the I have a feeling, right? So we're just going on your feelings. We're going on your gut. I'm going to show you some slides, and you're going to have the option of 1, 2, 3, or 4. It is not designed for you to think about it. We'll talk about it when we're done. I just want you to tell me, is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? And you can just do that in the chat. And so again, this is a safe space. This is an open space. And I am not trying to trick you into doing something that is going to get you in trouble. This really is to show you the power of your own bias. So we can go to the next slide. Tell me on this slide, who is the single parent? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Okay, got some 1s and 4s. Awesome. Next slide. Who on this slide is the CEO? You guys don't get to say 4 because you see me. That's not fair, but yes. Wonderful. 1s, 2s, 4s. Great. Next slide. Who on this slide grew up in the ghetto? Perfect. All around. Next slide. Who's your DEI consultant? Okay. 2, 2, 4, 3. I love it. It's a lot of talking. Next slide. Who has their PhD? 4, 2, 1, 4. Okay. No, okay, we got 1, 3. All right, next slide. Who's your Uber driver? Okay. Awesome. Next slide. Who's the bad driver in this photo? 1, 2, 3, or 4? No judgment here. I can see some faces. Just put a number. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Who's the bad driver here? Awesome. Thank you. Next slide. Receptionist. Who are you going to hire as your receptionist? You need one today. Who are you going to hire? Okay. 1s, 2s, 4s. No 3s. Awesome. Next slide. Who's always late to work? Okay. A lot of 3s and 4s. Okay. Awesome. Next slide. Who will you hire to replace you? By the way, that's a great place to be if you're involved in that process. Who are you going to hire to replace you? Okay. Awesome. Next slide. Who fits into your culture at the office? Okay. 4 fits in the culture. Awesome. Some 2s and 3s. Next slide. And you walk into a meeting, who do you speak to first? Awesome. All right, and then I think this is the last slide. Ashley, one more slide. Whoever's closest to me. Awesome. Okay, so that is a quick exercise that I like to go through just to show you how quickly your brain will default to that stereotype. It will default to the bias. And so I am certain that we have business people on the call today, and I know we are not making these type of decisions. We are not making hiring decisions from pictures, but it is proven research with some of the things that Miss Benita had gone over before. But I'll give you an example of when my bias and the bias of a group of people that I put together to hire people, it lived itself out loud, right? When we were looking for a receptionist, and I pulled together a panel because I thought, well, I want to eliminate some bias. So I'm going to get a panel of people so I can have diversity in thought. So I thought we were doing great. We have the interview with multiple people. And I go back and I say, okay, well, these are the people. We did group interviews, if you guys are familiar with that as well. Some people don't present well in a big group. Some people are better one-on-one, but we're in a position where we needed to hire quickly and we had a lot of applicants. So we thought panel group interview. Well, I knew who I wanted to hire, but it was the opposite of what everyone else wanted to hire. So I said, okay, I have one more thing that I think we can do to help us really recognize that there's bias. During the process of sitting down and talking about who are we going to hire, words like nice smile came out, very engaged and comforting. You know, those are words that really, I don't care if my receptionist has a great smile, right? We're just going off the norm. So I said, okay, here's one last activity. And so what I did is I put on a piece of paper, we went back into the group of room of folks, and I said, this is really one main component of your job. Your job is to write an email in response to an event that we've had. And so I want you to say, you know, it's from me. I want you to thank them. And that's all that really the information I gave them. Everyone wrote down on a sheet of paper. They didn't put their name on it. So then I take that back to the panel and I said, let's pick our person based on the writing sample. The writing sample did not match the person that they wanted to hire. And so I was able to show them that, okay, look what just happened here. We were diverse in thought, but our biases creeped in because we weren't looking at what we needed in the person. We were looking more on the physical realm, and we need to figure out what they're going to be able to do for the organization. So that's how quickly it happens. And even if you recognize it, like Ms. Benita said, you recognize that the bias is there, you have to stop and pivot and think and then make your decision. So that way your unconscious bias does not turn into a prejudice, right? If it is conscious, it is a prejudice. If it is unconscious, then it's a bias, and it's your job to recognize that. So that was the end of that activity. I appreciate you guys putting the numbers in the chat, but if anyone wants to share kind of how they felt doing that during that exercise, I'd love to hear how you guys felt about that.
Yeah, I personally felt very uncomfortable choosing people just on a photo. Personally, as yeah, I'm glad I will never do that exercise again.
Yeah. 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 Do you guys look up? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was uncomfortable. But and the times that I did really recognize the bias when, you know, when I was picking someone, it surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
So for me, you know, it felt like some of the things of the past that I, you know, had experienced of biases sort of came up. So it's like, how do you look anew at a person when you're engaged with them in, you know, in a conversation or you know, in some kind of dialogue with them. So the past biases sort of surface to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, we have to make these rapid decisions sometimes, right? And it's even when you walk into a room. When I go and do a DEI talk, the first person I'm looking for is a Black woman. There's no doubt about it. I want to lock eyes with a Black woman because my bias is I'm going to feel comfortable if I can see someone in the room that looks like me, talks like me, right? But that's just a bias. That's not really true. I probably should be locking eyes with the person that paid me to come and speak because they know what I'm going to talk about and we're on the same page, right? But it's that bias that creeps in. It's what makes me comfortable. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm not going to lock eyes with anyone else. But for me to feel comfortable instantly, I always go to someone that looks like me, or if I can't find a Black woman, because that's happened multiple times, I will just find a woman. And then I start going down the list. Okay, no woman, no Black woman. What about a woman? Okay, well, just, is there any minority in the room, right? And unfortunately and fortunately for me, I've been in those situations. So I always find it quite interesting how our biases creep up on us. So, well, good. Well, awesome. Miss Benita or Sean, did you guys have anything with that? That was the only thing I had for my little fun activity.
Oh, I think that is so telling. You know, we're going to give a resource in a couple of minutes, which is a more in-depth version of the activity you took us through, the implicit association test. But, you know, just having that opportunity that you provided us, Zenovia, was just even getting a snapshot of an inkling of what are my biases. You know, what pops up, you know, for all the reasons that people shared, from past associations, from assumptions, from images in the media, you know, wherever that comes from. And they come quickly. You know, I didn't, you know, and I looked at the numbers pop up in chat, you know, there was no hesitation. Mm-hmm. And there was no consensus from everyone that this was the photo representing this title. So I really thank you and appreciate that activity, because that's how we get to really surface and make visible what otherwise is invisible. Great job. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
so Sean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to echo. I said that is a fabulous just reality. And I think we always say that, you know, you have to acknowledge that everybody has biases. And that's the initial reaction that comes to mind. It's what you do with it from there that keeps it. And you heard this in a lot of what you all said in response, is what you do to keep it from becoming a prejudice. to a bias which you're consciously intending. Because I mean, I caught myself too, and I tried to react with like the initial stereotype that came to my mind. And I knew that it was wrong. And I knew that it wasn't that, you know, that I would like have the initial thought, then I would check and adjust and move forward. But really good just awareness. And that's the power of being able to move through implicit biases.
Absolutely. So if we can go, Ashley, to the next slide.
Sure.
because-
I did want to recognize one of our participants had their hand raised.
Oh,
and
thank
so
you.
I just lowered her hand and took her off of unmute.
Okay.
I think I'm actually, I don't know. I'm going to pass on my comment. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, you sure, Lihia?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if something else pops up, Ashley, please help me. Thank you for helping me see a hand that I missed. So if we look at the next slide, so how do we create different outcomes? You know, how do we create outcomes that are the kind of outcomes we intend to experience versus those that we fall into, you know, merely as a fact of being on automatic pilot? Well, you know, research has shown there are 3 proven ways that we can create different outcomes. First of all, by raising awareness of our implicit bias, moving it from the unconscious into the conscious part of our brain so that now we know it's there. The activity that Zenovia just took us through is a great and fun way to do that. There is also an online, anonymous online test that you can take. It's called the Implicit Association Test. And the link is on the slide, but if you just put Implicit Association Test in your search engine, it will come up. And this has been an ongoing research study for, oh gosh, more than a couple of decades now. The lead researchers are Banaji Mazrin at Harvard and Anthony Greenwald at University of Washington. And so this test sits on the Harvard site. They ask you a few demographics, I think like your age or race, but you never have to put your name in. And then you get to choose. There's more than a dozen different tests, and you can choose which ones you want to take. Do you want to look at things like gender, age, body size, race? You know, it goes ability, it goes on and on and on. And so once you take the test, then you get a readout that tells you based on your responses, whether what you're biased for and what you're biased against that came up in that test. And you can take it from a computer, you can take it from your smartphone. Actually, I find it's easier to do on my smartphone. But what it does is that it brings to the conscious the biases that reside in your head. The first time I took it, I thought, well, you know, I've been doing this work, you know, more than 15 years. Chances are I'm not going to find that I have any biases. Boy, was I surprised. So, but it's given me a place to focus, a place to start, and recognizing this is a bias. Now I can work with that. Now I can be more conscious of it when I'm interacting with someone or with a group that might be impacted by that bias. Another proven strategy is opening ourselves up to feedback from trusted sources. And feedback in today's environment is a tricky issue. You know, first of all, you really have to, express a sincere desire to those around you that you want feedback. You have to ask for it from time to time. You have to nurture it. If you get feedback, even if you don't agree with it, say, oh, thank you so much, because you want to keep those channels open. This is one of the most difficult gifts for human beings to give to each other. And so if we had a feedback-rich culture, a lot of implicit bias would be quelled at its very beginning. You know, I've been in a group for 20 years, and we meet first initially monthly, and now about quarterly. And after one of our meetings, one of my colleagues called me aside. She said, Benita, is it okay if I give you some feedback? You know, you asked for it. I said, absolutely. She said, when one of us is talking, while we are speaking, before we're even finished, if you disagree with us, this is what you do. I didn't have a clue that I was doing that. As a matter of fact, I rather doubted her. But you know what? A month later, I caught myself doing it because she had raised it to my awareness. Feedback is just invaluable. And then the third thing that we can do is adopt a proven strategy that will actually help us to reduce implicit bias. So we're going to be sending you a resource afterwards. I think, Ashley, the strategies to reduce implicit bias, right? But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I am going to put some strategies in the chat box because these are strategies that we want you to focus on. These are things that actually work. One of those is simply finding common ground with another person. You know, focusing on what you have in common with individuals rather than what's so different about you. I remember being in a workshop where I had a partner who was a young man, quite a bit younger than me. And he told me that he had immigrated here from India. And I thought, oh boy, we're not going to have anything in common. And by the end of our conversation, we found out we could have had the same mother. So focus on what you have in common. Another strategy is a reflective strategy called counter stereotypic imaging. And so it's really intentionally developing new images that counter your negative or stereotypical images. You know, expose yourself to or think about people in the same groups that you're stereotyping who possess positive traits that contrast with your stereotypes. Another proven strategy is individuation. You know, basically, there is no substitute for getting to know each person as an individual. And once you do that, you take them out of a group. Well, that's instead of just say, well, that's just a man, or that's just a secretary, or that's just a skilled worker, whatever group you're putting them in, and consider who is this unique individual. The next strategy number 4, is perspective taking. And this is when we imagine ourselves to be a part of a group, a member of a group that we stereotype or that a negative image comes to mind. What might it be like to walk in that person's shoes on a daily basis? What might it be like? What might it take to function successfully? And I see when I put that in, it kind of, yeah. And what adaptive techniques they might use to function successfully.
Oh, you're muted, Benita.
The last strategy, thank you. The last strategy that I just put in the chat was increasing opportunities for contact. You know, how might we, let's see, did I put it in there? Did it come up? Okay. Now it is. Okay. So meet and engage with people from and who are members of groups outside your own. There are actually organizations that require that members of their leadership team spend a certain amount of time each month with a group that is different than their own, older, younger, different gender identity or expression, different physical ability, different class, different first language, whatever that might be. And so that is a way then to find out what it is that we do have in common, and also a way to find out, you know, what is it that I've been holding on to that no longer works. You know, that I rely on my own personal lived experiences versus relying on those things like, well, everybody knows kinds of things. Or, you know, and it's so, you know, in a city like Renton, it's so easy to do. We can go to farmers market and meet people who are different than us. You know, we can go to events, we can go to the museum, we can go to festivals, we can do research, we can explore media, books. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we can gain that exposure. And so this page is actually said, and I've kind of gone through the first 5 strategies. There's actually 10 on the page. The first 5 are more things that we can do individually. And the last 5 are things that we can do when we're making decisions in groups. Oh, there you go, Ashley. Thank you. You're awesome. So we've covered the first 5, and you will get the handout with all 10 strategies. So just focusing on those 5, you know, what we would really like you to do is to have some time in a breakout session, and this is just going to be 3 minutes. So we, you know, just an opportunity to think about the strategies that I've shared, and I want you to pick one that you can commit to using, and to share with the people in your breakout, how will you employ this strategy in real life? So instead of just saying, I'm going to increase opportunities for contact, if that's my strategy, how will I manifest that? How will I employ it in real life? What will I do? You know, if I'm going to use perspective taking, how will I employ that in real life? So you're going to have 3 minutes in your breakout room to share which of those strategies you're willing to try for the next 30 days. Think of this as your 30-day free home trial. Which of these would you be willing to try for the next month to see if it makes a difference for you? Okay, Ashley, you're going to get us into breakouts. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I hope that all of your breakout sessions were as rich and informative as the one that I was in. I learned some things. And so this is an opportunity just for a large group share back. I kind of call this sharing the wisdom in the room. And so, anything that you would like to share, whether it's one of the strategies that you're going to employ in real life or something that bubbled up for you through the course of this workshop, anything that you would like to share. I'm just going to open the floor. So either raise your hand or just feel free to unmute yourself.
So for me, one of the people in my group had said, kind of putting the past in the past and moving forward. And I really like having tools, these that we're getting, from these workshops that you've been doing, to be able to do that, to walk forward and to keep walking forward, putting one step in front of the other, and not getting stuck maybe in a place that I don't think most people really want to be stuck in, or living in the past. So that was, I thought, something really important that one of the people in my group shared.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then I had given my son a t-shirt, it just came to my mind, or a shirt that said, stop looking backwards, you're not going that way. And so that came to my mind.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Words to live by. Who else would like to share?
Benita, I'm just
John?
going to throw out one word that someone in my group said that just really resonated with all the strategies, is just be curious. And that whole word on just, not going with what you know, but just trying to learn more about people, about situations and common experiences. And then I'll call myself out as to just like check your biases, because the first biases come up, and it's like when the Zenovia was going through the exercises, and I shared this with my group, the first one is like you like default to the stereotypes, like, well, that culture is a bad driver, it's like, and I'm not even going to say that to to exacerbate the stereotype, but in reality, it's me over here on my cell phone who's the bad driver, and then people like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
So, so someone in our group talked about, being willing to listen to the other, and I thought that was really powerful. And you had asked a question about how the workshops have really, helped to shape. So I think for me, the workshops are really creating a new path forward, having us, as a community, as a society, to look anew, lay aside the old, and look in a new way. Sean saying, checking our biases and moving forward in a new way. So I like this conscious awareness of really just transforming our world, our community. So yeah.
Thank you. So often we can be judgmental about ourselves. We can judge ourselves. Oh, I must be a bad person because I thought this about that individual, or I'm so embarrassed because I said this. And and part of that, moving forward is letting go of that. There was a quote by I think it was C.S. Lewis. I may be wrong, but it always stuck with me. And I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's something like, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And and I think for me, that's what it's about. Let me start where I am. And and even though maybe I had learned something today I didn't know before, now I can change the ending going forward. So I think that as human beings, we've got to be patient with ourselves as well as with others, because being judgmental, even about ourselves, can stop us in our journey. toward where we want to be. Any others? Zenovia, Sean, anything else you want to add?
I have a question, if I may just jump in very quickly. And it may just be for a future topic or something like that, but I'm curious about strategies that we can engage or deploy in helping my own community understand the fact that we all have implicit biases and kind of tone down the rhetoric and the conversations that happen in a lot of our rent and community forums. I would love to figure out a way to, this is such a great topic, and there's like all of 12 of us, right? And this is great. I'm not hating on it, but I would love to have a broader, ¿cómo se dice? Audience. And so that's all I have.
Thank you. And, you know, and you're right. It is one of our hopes in participating with you in these conversations is to really just widen the circle in our community. You know, if we think of each one of us as an ambassador, because we move in multiple circles, we wear multiple hats, you know, in our families, in our faith-based organizations, in our volunteer organizations, in our neighborhoods, in maybe committees or commissions in which we participate, in social service organizations. You know, what would it take for each of us to take this conversation there? You know, what difference might it make if we just kind of talked about our own experience and our own learning and encouraged others to join us in that learning? It has to start somewhere. And Leah, I think that's such, you know, what you said is so vital. You know, how do we share this more widely in our community? And it starts with us.
Yeah. And I would offer, I mean, if you want to reach out to me, I'll put my email address on chat to try to action step this a little further. Please feel free, because I love where you're going. I think that's incredibly valuable. And as Ashley mentioned in chat, I mean, this is a smaller audience than we normally have, you know, maybe the Memorial Day weekend, but also people do follow up with this conversation. It's because it's resourced on YouTube.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is one of the smallest audiences we've had since we launched these conversations. When was it? Last December?
Yeah, back in September.
We launched, I think. September. Yeah. And so, yes, you know, this may be one that we need to repeat. It occurred to me just before we started, this is Memorial Day weekend. And I could tell by the volume of traffic, a lot of people are already on the road. So timing often has something to do with it, but we can certainly consider doing a repeat on this in the future as well. So with that, Ashley, if we could just go to the last slide. What Zenovia and I would like you to take away with you, and thank you for your active participation today, is, you know, given what we've discussed in this workshop this evening, what is your next step? What is your next step? Zenovia, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just, you know, I appreciate being here. These conversations are absolutely amazing because it just sparks a whole nother conversation. And that's really what it's about. And I'm seeing people here that I've seen, you know, time and time again. And what that means to me is that people are willing to do the work. Right? They're showing up, they're active, they're engaged. Doesn't matter where they are on that spectrum, right? Some of us are at a 1, right? We don't recognize we're on the 1 with the DEI, and then we have our 10s. We're coming together as a community and getting closer and closer to being able to share and give this information out. And so I would implore anyone who's on this call, the best thing that you can do, if there was one thing on this call that you learned or it was an aha moment, you should take this recording and you should share it with someone else, because then that may spark that one person. And if we get it out of this smaller community, which again, this is very small for us, so we are going to chalk this up to the holiday weekend. I am not going to believe that this topic would lead us to having 19, not only because everyone in here matters, so having 19 people on this call. Again, I think it's just about sharing, and I just appreciate everybody that was here today. Anytime that I can stand next to anyone involved with the Renton Chamber, I am willing to do that. I love the topic of bias and implicit bias and DEI as a whole. And I just enjoy the conversations. I loved your presentation. We'll have to talk offline because there are a couple of things that I need for my own presentation when I do that work. But one thing that stood out to me was that the astronaut, or not the astronaut, but the hurricane. I was blown. I just could not contain myself. And so that, for me, when I think about, if that's a safety issue, how come we just don't all name them men so that we can keep people safe? Like if there's research done, right? Like to me, I would just think it'd be crazy now to call the hurricane Shelly. It's like, no, we don't want Shelly, right? We want Sean. So that just blew me away today. And again, coming into these rooms where you think you know something, no matter where you are on the spectrum, no matter where you are on your DEI journey, you will learn something by listening to other people speak. So I appreciate you, Miss Benita, and the Renton Chamber.
Oh, I appreciate you. And I just appreciate the depth that you brought to our joint collaboration in this workshop. I will work with you again anytime, Miss Zenovia. So Sean, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you to kind of do a wrap up and, talk about the resources that we'll be sending out and so forth.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, just fabulous. I mean, this is always such an enjoyable and enriching conversation to have. So thank you guys very much. And thanks the attendees to make it. And again, we'll just chalk this up for, our communication of the event, and we'll make sure that we get it out there. I mean, especially with the partnership that we have with the city and the Kent Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to be blasting it out to make this more of a regional approach, just to strengthen by numbers. That's the goal and objectives. But that being said, those who did show up here and found their way through against all odds, you guys are true champions, and thank you for that. And that's what we say. And it's like, how do you get involved? I mean, it starts with us. It starts with the people who demonstrate that commitment and the passion and the vested interest in being those foot soldiers on the ground, just to enlist others. So we want to ask, and you can put it in chat, follow us up with us later, what other topics of interest would be relevant to you that you would like to see? I mean, we already hear that putting out a future iteration on the implicit bias and how to actually target and have those conversations with communities to get people to understand will be valuable. In the future, the next step for the future, we're looking in June to have a panel discussion related to the challenges faced by the LGBTQIA+ community. And then in the future state, we're looking also to identify how to do an organizational self-assessment. I mean, your organization, where you stand and what actions that you guys can be doing. I know that we as the Renton Chamber of Commerce are in the process of doing that ourselves. So that's, I guess, in summary, thank you guys all for coming here. We'll make sure that there are no other questions in chat. The recordings are available through, and Ashley, would you like to point us to the specific link? But if you go to the Renton Chamber of Commerce website and enter into the search community conversations, those recordings will pop up and become available, and they're all archived on YouTube. I'm demonstrating the comfortable 2-minute pause because I still see people on board here to make sure that there are no other questions or comments. We will send out these resources that we spoke about afterwards, especially to those of you who attended.
Yeah, and please, Sean said, please let us know if there are particular topics that you think about that you would like to see at future conversations, or if there are particular presenters that you would like to hear from. We're very open and very flexible, and we have a wealth of talent here in our own community And I'm including Kent in that because they're in partnership with us on that. So please let us know what you think would help you in your next step. And we are going to continue to support these conversations. So thank you all. Okay, microaggressions.
Yeah, microaggressions. We are dynamic. We are adaptable. We can do anything, and we acknowledge that DEI is more extensive than the normal BIPOC conversations that can include neurodiversity. So again, just think outside of the box as to what would be valuable.
Ooh, leading with an equity lens. I love that one.